At 10:47 a.m. this morning, inside courtroom 4 of the Federal District Courthouse in Washington, D.C., Judge Tanya Chutkan delivered a decision that will shape the remainder of Donald Trump's life. Looking directly at the defendant from the bench, she read the sentence aloud in a calm, deliberate voice. She began by outlining the jury's findings. Trump, she stated, had been convicted of conspiracy to defraud the United States, obstruction of an official proceeding, and conspiracy against rights. She described these offenses as among the most serious violations a citizen can commit against the democratic system. According to the judge, the damage caused to the rule of law and to the peaceful transfer of power was, in her words, incalculable. After reviewing the sentencing guidelines, hearing arguments from both sides, and considering the nature of the conduct involved, the judge announced her decision. On the first count, she imposed 5 years. On the second, 20 years. On the third, 10 years. She ordered that the sentences run consecutively rather than concurrently, bringing the total to 35 years in federal prison. Under federal law, she noted, there is no parole. Trump would be taken into custody immediately and assigned to a federal correctional facility to be determined by the Bureau of Prisons. 5 minutes later, at 10:52 a.m., U.S. Marshals approached the defense table. Without resistance or comment, Trump was placed in handcuffs and escorted through a side door out of the courtroom. Observers described the moment as silent and controlled. He did not address the court or those watching as he was led away. By 11:03 a.m., he had been processed at the courthouse detention facility. Officials recorded fingerprints once more, assigned a federal inmate identification number, and placed him in a holding cell pending transfer to a federal prison. In that moment, a former president of the United States officially entered federal custody. The sentencing hearing that led to this outcome had begun 2 hours earlier at 9:00 a.m. The courtroom filled quickly. Spectators lined up outside before dawn, hoping to secure one of the limited public seats, while media organizations crowded into overflow rooms as major networks broadcast the proceedings live. At 9:03 a.m., the lead prosecutor delivered the government's sentencing recommendation. Speaking for more than half an hour, he detailed the seriousness of the convictions. He argued that the defendant had attempted to overturn a presidential election by pressuring state officials, urging his vice president to reject certified results, and summoning supporters to the Capitol when those efforts failed. He referenced the violence that followed, noting fatalities, injuries to law enforcement officers, and the breach of the Capitol building. The prosecutor emphasized what he described as a lack of remorse. According to the government, Trump had not acknowledged wrongdoing or apologized. Instead, he had continued to criticize the judicial process and present himself as a victim. Given the severity of the offenses and the need for deterrence, the prosecution recommended a sentence of 20 years. At 9:47 a.m., defense attorney John Lauro rose to present arguments on behalf of his client. He spoke for nearly half an hour, highlighting Trump's age and lack of prior criminal record. Lauro described his client as a 78-year-old who believed he was acting to protect election integrity. He argued that Trump had exercised his constitutional rights in challenging the election results and did not intend to obstruct official proceedings. The defense urged the court to consider a far lighter penalty. Lauro suggested that a lengthy prison term would effectively serve as a death sentence given Trump's age and requested a sentence of time served combined with supervised release and community service. At 10:17 a.m., Trump himself stood to address the court, exercising his right of allocution. He spoke for approximately 11 minutes. He did not offer an apology or express remorse. Instead, he maintained that he had done nothing wrong and described the proceedings as unfair. He asserted that he believed the election had been compromised and characterized the trial as politically motivated. He concluded by stating that history would ultimately vindicate him. When he finished, the courtroom fell silent. The judge had heard the prosecution request a substantial prison term. She had heard the defense request leniency. She had listened to the defendant's own statement. After a brief pause, she delivered the maximum sentence allowed under the law. As marshals placed Trump in custody minutes later, observers noted that the courtroom remained quiet. Attorneys at both tables stayed seated. Spectators, regardless of their views, appeared stunned by the finality of what had just occurred. By 11:15 a.m., Trump's legal team had already filed a notice of appeal, signaling their intention to challenge both the conviction and the sentence. Outside the courthouse, the legal and political reaction to the decision was only beginning to unfold. Less than half an hour after the notice of appeal was filed, additional reactions began emerging from officials and public figures. At 11:34 a.m., Special Counsel Jack Smith stepped outside the courthouse to deliver a brief statement. He confirmed that a jury had returned a conviction and that a federal judge had imposed a sentence following established procedures. He emphasized that the outcome reflected what he described as accountability under the law and reiterated that the case centered on upholding legal standards regardless of position or influence. After speaking, he left without taking questions. Shortly after noon, the White House released a short written response. The statement indicated that the president respected the independence of the judicial process and declined to comment on the sentence itself. That message reflected an effort to maintain distance from the proceedings while acknowledging the significance of the moment. By 12:47 p.m., responses from across the political spectrum began to circulate. Some lawmakers characterized the sentence as severe but consistent with the seriousness of the offenses. Others described it as excessive and argued that the punishment was disproportionate. Public statements reflected a country sharply divided over both the verdict and the sentence. As legal experts analyzed the situation, attention turned to what a 35-year federal sentence actually means in practical terms. Under federal law, there is no parole system. Inmates cannot earn early release in the same way many state prisoners can. However, they may receive limited reductions through good conduct credits, up to 54 days per year, potentially reducing a sentence by approximately 15%. Even with maximum credit applied, a 35-year sentence could still amount to roughly 30 years in custody. Given Trump's age of 78, such a timeline would place any potential release well beyond the typical life expectancy for an American male. Analysts noted that the sentence effectively ensures decades in federal custody unless reduced through appeal or clemency. Responsibility for determining where Trump will serve his sentence now rests with the Bureau of Prisons. Officials will evaluate factors including age, health, security classification, and facility capacity. Because he is not considered a violent offender, legal observers suggest he may be assigned to a low or medium security institution, though the final decision has not yet been announced. Wherever he is placed, he will follow standard federal prison routines: assigned housing, institutional clothing, monitored communications, and regulated visitation. At 1:15 p.m., prominent legal analysts began weighing in on the likelihood of success on appeal. Some pointed out that the sentence falls within statutory limits and that judges are given broad discretion in sentencing decisions. Unless an appellate court identifies significant legal errors during the trial process, they noted it may be difficult to overturn or substantially reduce the penalty. Others emphasized that the appeals process could take months or even years to resolve, during which time Trump will remain in federal custody. By 2 p.m., Trump had been transferred from the courthouse detention facility to a U.S. Marshals holding location while awaiting permanent placement within the federal prison system. This interim period may last several days or weeks as officials finalize housing arrangements. In the weeks and months ahead, several developments will determine how the situation evolves. One key question is whether an appellate court will consider releasing Trump on bail pending appeal. Legal observers note that such requests are rarely granted in cases involving lengthy sentences and serious convictions, making approval uncertain. Another major development will be the selection of a permanent correctional facility. Placement decisions often reflect both logistical and personal factors, including proximity to family and medical considerations. Trump's age and health will likely be part of that evaluation. The progression of the appeal itself will also be closely watched. If appellate judges determine that significant procedural errors occurred during the trial, they could order a new trial or modify the sentence. If not, the original ruling will remain in place. Analysts also note that expressions of remorse can sometimes influence post-sentencing considerations, though no such statements have been made to date. Public reaction will continue to shape the broader environment surrounding the case. Polling and commentary may influence political discourse, though under federal law, only a president has authority to grant clemency. Any such action would be politically complex and uncertain. Legal commentators have outlined 3 primary scenarios for the future. In the first, the conviction and sentence are upheld on appeal, and Trump serves decades in federal custody. In the second, appellate courts identify legal issues significant enough to reduce the sentence or order a new proceeding, potentially shortening the time served. In the third, a future presidential clemency decision results in a commuted sentence, though such an outcome would likely face intense scrutiny. Beyond immediate legal questions, historians and legal scholars are already noting the broader significance of the moment. No former U.S. president has previously been sentenced to a federal prison term. While past presidents have faced investigations and legal challenges, none have received a sentence of this magnitude following a criminal conviction. The judge's decision to impose consecutive sentences resulting in the statutory maximum underscores the seriousness with which the court viewed the offenses. By choosing the highest available penalty under federal law, the court delivered a ruling that will likely be studied for years in legal and political contexts. What remains certain is the sequence of events that unfolded today. At 10:47 a.m., a federal judge announced a 35-year sentence. Minutes later, Trump was taken into custody. By late afternoon, he was in the custody of federal authorities awaiting transfer to a permanent correctional facility. His legal team has initiated an appeal that may take years to resolve. The courtroom where the sentence was delivered was filled with observers who had waited hours for a seat. Some reacted with visible emotion. Others sat quietly as the proceedings concluded. Outside, crowds gathered reflecting a wide range of reactions. The scene underscored the historic nature of the moment and the continuing national attention it will receive. The appeals process will now determine what happens next. Decisions regarding facility placement, legal challenges, and long-term outcomes will unfold over time. For now, the sentence stands: 35 years in federal prison, imposed after a 2-hour hearing that concluded with the maximum penalty allowed by law.